Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our panel discussion titled 5G Commercialization and Beyond. Our first panelist is Mr. Michael Patrick Foley, Chief Executive Officer, Grameenphone Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Mr. Michael Patrick Foley. Mr. Foley was appointed as Chief Executive Officer of Grameenphone, Bangladesh's leading telecom company, effective from 26 May 2017. Before joining Grameenphone, he was CEO of Telenor Bulgaria. A Canadian by birth, he joined Telenor in 2014 as CEO of Telenor Pakistan. He has more than 30 years of sales, marketing and operational experience in the telecom, retail and gaming sectors from both advanced and growth markets. And he has held assignments in Nigeria, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Bulgaria, Pakistan, Tunisia, amongst others. Ladies and gentlemen, our first panelist, Mr. Michael Patrick Foley. Welcome, sir. Please join me in welcoming on stage our next panelist, Ms. Seema Ambastha, Senior Executive Vice President, India and Global Sales and Solutions, NTT Netmagic. Please put your hands together for Ms. Seema Ambastha, who is a strong industry leader with experience across various roles in IT and technology areas spanning global support, pre-sales and solution and professional services. As a business leader with over 29 years in products and services in IT industry, she has successfully delivered solutions to industry vertical sectors like e-commerce, financial service, telecom and manufacturing in the recent past with deep expertise in solution around databases, data warehousing, business intelligence, big data, virtualization and cloud services. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Seema Ambastha. I would now like to welcome on stage the chairperson and moderator for this panel discussion, Mr. Arnab Basu, Managing Partner, East and Technology Consulting Leader for PwC India, PricewaterhouseCoopers Private Limited. Mr. Basu is the Managing Partner for PwC in Eastern India and Bangladesh, and he also leads the technology consulting for PwC in India, and also a part of the Global Technology Leadership Team. He also leads the industrial product sector with PwC Advisory. He has been with the firm for 18 years and specializes in large-scale business transformations using a variety of digital platforms and bringing to life integrated solutions around digital operations. He is also responsible for PwC's investments in emerging technology areas. He leads a few priority client relationships for PwC in the industrial product sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome on stage our chairperson and moderator, Mr. Arnab Basu. And now the stage is all over to you, sir.
So, good afternoon. We do have a fairly difficult topic to handle, but it's obviously a pleasure and privilege to be amongst two leading speakers on this topic. As you can, probably well realize, 5G is something which we have been talking about, hearing about, and obviously many of us have been hoping that it will make its entry into our lives very fast. But I think today we are here to discuss about some of the challenges and of course some of the benefits which we think that it can bring into our lives. So we keep hearing about Internet of Things, how Internet of Things is sort of changing the landscape in this ever-changing, always connected world. So the move from 4G LTE to 5G would probably give us, of course, the ability to handle far more data at almost real time. The latency would be taken away. And of course, it will make several of the use cases come to life, which today probably requires almost zero latency. And probably, the most easiest example would be an autonomous car. Though I don't, and I was discussing with Michael that Michael is based out of Dhaka, I am out of Kolkata. We don't really foresee in the near future autonomous cars plying on Kolkata or Dhaka roads. But yes, if autonomous cars were to happen, I think 5G would be almost a necessary step for that in India and of course in Bangladesh as well. Now, coming to 5G as a topic and some of the challenges around 5G or commercialization of 5G, we keep hearing about the cost of the devices, how 5G would require far more closer towers, the kind of fibers it would need, why that can have social impact, how 5G in an ever-connected world can bring in new new issues around cybersecurity. It is also true that, when you look at 5G and think of, this kind of a zero latency, huge, massive IoT kind of connections happening, the overall growth plans that we have, each of our countries, would those growth plans also mean lesser jobs along with growth in revenue? One of the key applications of 5G, as we keep hearing, is around industrial automation and how you can really use 5G to automate far more seamlessly. And, that would probably bring in a lot of jobs becoming redundant because you can have machines take that over, considering the, the bandwidth and, of course, the response time of that. So those are some of the issues which we will discuss. Maybe I can start with you, Seema. When you think of 5G, what are some of the critical advantages of 5G from your perspective, which we should be looking at?
Not from our perspective. I think 5G will have a larger, impact in terms of how this network is going to, how it will converge and how it's going to serve the efficiency and performance, right? So let me give you an example. I think it's a lot easier. Today, I have seen a shift in traffic. If you look at data center versus what traffic comes in, I've seen a huge shift in traffic. We used to get from conventional providers, service providers, like could be Tata or whatever, and we have large bandwidths with them. But now I've seen this shift completely to Geo, okay? So there's a whole lot of audience getting ready for 5G in some form or the other. It's a huge thing, Second is the spectrum, right? Between 25 to 28 gigahertz, I'm not sure if that is going to be the spectrum that gets allocated. You will have a much more seamless sharing of spectrum using 5G, which today I think is a big problem. Don't you find a problem with 4G LTE on the spectrum share? We have seen enough of them. The third is, while we all think that there's going to be a huge challenge in terms of integrating with the current conventional devices, may not be, because a lot of these incoming traffic is going to be more broadband-based, Wi-Fi broadband-based. So it might require just an upgrade to be able to serve the incoming traffic. And therefore, the advantage that this can have is absolutely immense if it is exploited well. For example, everybody talks of autonomous cars, which may not be a reality in India for some time, but the reality in India could be telemedicine, because we really need a lot of very good quality, accessible, high-performance networks to be able to take our our healthcare to the very, very remote, right? Which is at a very reasonable cost. And I think that's a very important area for us to exploit initially, more than worrying about autonomous cars, and we'll get there sometime. But this could be a huge advantage in terms of an application area. We, as entity who's anyway globally, is a big the authority in 5G and networks, they actually are preparing the whole ground in terms of how these data centers will scale to this traffic. We are actually, we thought of this, and when we laid our fiber, these fibers are actually laid for next generation, right? So you don't We don't need to do a lot of other things. Our equipments are scalable. Our equipments are plug and play. Our integration with 4G LTE coexisting with 5G is easy. Our separation of traffic from the incoming to outgoing, we have made a whole lot of technologies around it which are seamless. So all this really matters, when we are doing this adoption. One is on the mobile, and two is to translate, to see how to cater to the data and take it to the real consumer. Right, so that's where we are working on, and I do see an advantage. I really don't know much about how this will pan for the companies like Ericsson and others who's really, really working on the technology of 5G to serve that market. But as companies or consumers and we redistribute network, I think there is a big advantage. Today, I don't think the networks they're succumbing to a lot of price and also the pressure of scalability, which we should overcome.
Thank you. Michael, I'll shift to you. When you look at 5G and we were discussing, would you like to tell us about some of the use cases that you think would be early adopters, and also how does it affect the social fabric in an emerging country like ours?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. There are three categories of use cases for 5G. The first is the most obvious one, is the speed to your handset. Broadband speeds will become much faster. That will open up the ability to replace fiber to the home and so on, and make it much more available to people who do not have that kind of infrastructure. The second thing is called massive machine type communication. And this is very low bandwidth, highly reliable, low power access to things like metering and so on that exist around, that we want to get electronic power meters, water meters, gas meters, also for the monitoring of certain kinds of infrastructure. They're very, very useful. And the one that we've been talking about, everybody, is about this ultra high speed, low latency machine type communication, which is really the kind of autonomous vehicles, remote surgery, in some cases robotic automation into plant. So these are the three categories. I generally think that there are available business cases emerging very quickly in all three in markets like India or Bangladesh. In the metering part, though, that can be done also on 4G. Some others will require 5G. But I just want to kind of give you an idea of our own market. In 2013, Bangladesh was still a 2G market. It launched 3G 14 years after the rest of the world. In 2018, we launched 4G 9 years after the rest of the world. In 2021, we will launch 5G essentially at the same time as the rest of the world, doing an 8-year journey where others took 20 or 25 years to do it. So that's part of the success of the country, but it also is creating some massive transformation in society. And we're going to see it much faster in a country like Bangladesh. And 5G enables a lot of other technologies. The gathering of data for AI and machine learning and artificial intelligence, this infrastructure that exists through the Internet of Things, gathering massive amounts of information and data, enables machine learning and so on. Add to that some of the advanced robotics that we see coming now, and as senior managers in the country and as industrialists, we start to think about what does that have to do with the nature of work? What does that have to do with the nature of how people will make money? And we're starting to see signs now of economic growth in countries like Bangladesh, which has had 6.5% growth over the last 10 years, maybe more than 7% last year, maybe close to 8% this year, but we're seeing growth without job creation. And that is something that we need to, as responsible leaders in business, to understand both the positive and the negative impacts of the tools that we put in the hands of the economy. And that's something that we need to spend some time talking about.
So taking cue from what Seema said, in your country, how do you see of course we have our current challenges with the network. She spoke about telemedicine, which really means that the network has to reach, the really remote places inside, India, Bangladesh, and we know that our countries are not that, well connected even currently on the infrastructure side. And then, as you said, that 2018 was when Bangladesh, got 4G. So you see investments in 4G and 5G continuing at the same time. How do you see that, sort of commercially being viable?
The velocity of capital that has had to been deployed between 13 and now, 13 and 21, in a market the size of Bangladesh is immense. and 2 out of 3 companies are in trouble. 2 or 3 companies in the country may go bankrupt or may have to change ownership. So I think that's an important piece of it. However, you wouldn't underestimate, in Bangladesh, my network, or the network that I have a pleasure of leading, Grameenphone, has 16,700 sites, covering 99.5 plus of the population. Every one of those sites is broadband, 3G and or 4G. And by the end of next year, they will all be 4G. The benefit of launching 4G 12 years after the rest of the world is that the technology that we're launching now is the bridge technology to 5G. So therefore, most of it is upgradable. This is a big advantage for Bangladesh, so that we don't have to deploy large amounts of capital when time comes to upgrade 5G in different parts of the country. So, and our spectrum doesn't expire till 2026 for 4G. We have to buy spectrum for 5G, that's a different story. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the demand in rural for broadband services is as strong, if not stronger, than it is in urban areas. And the secret of our success has been to deploy it everywhere.
Seema, when you hear this story in Bangladesh and you think of your data centers and how you're getting ready, and you talked about how your centers are already sort of ready for the next level. What are some of the pitfalls you think for an emerging country when this kind of new technology comes in, and what could be some of the commercial risks around it?
No, but I think the first pitfall itself is we will have a prohibitive, one-time changing cost, which you cannot overlook, and we have to see where that gets loaded, right? So that's one. The second is, of course, our spectrum itself is not, whether we should, yes, that is, and government will monetize, and that's not going to be an easy thing, right? So once you invest in spectrum, you look at how much you can invest on the other thing, and I just hope, it doesn't delay, and therefore, to really see the fruitfulness of that should not take time. If that happens, then you would probably miss the mileage, which is extremely important. The second is a whole lot of integration. I don't really know. I'm still asking my people, right? There's an existing Wi-Fi and wired. The network has to be converging enough, actually delivering that efficiency and throughput for 5G. This is the biggest challenge. We'll have to find right investments, right equipment, right kind of technology at the right time, and make sure we can, and this is going to be quite a bearing on people like us, because otherwise I'm going to say, okay, your traffic is coming on this, you want a millisecond, like somebody wants to host IoT, I'm sorry, I can't, because mine is not really, there to support it, right? So if you want sub-milliseconds or sub-seconds or sub-whatever, femtosecond and attoseconds, and you have to change. And this will be across the two networks. It won't be one. The incoming could be broadband, but the outgoing will have these two challenges. I cannot push it through the same kind of a device for outgoing. It's going to be a challenge. So we'll have to see how this really going to work. We have to analyze on use cases, and we are working on some use cases. Right now we are working on use cases where you have IoT on monitoring, not so much on control, but we have to work on both IoT on monitoring and control so that it's really benefiting using 5G. No point in saying I will still live on monitoring and I will not deliver control, because that would have defeated the purpose, right? So yeah, these are like potentially wired and current Wi-Fi to converge to deliver performance is one big challenge, pitfall and challenge.
Michael, when we hear of Bangladesh and some of the industries which are really doing well in Bangladesh, one of the key ones which keep coming up is the entire garments business, right? And we heard from many of the speakers today early in the morning as well. The business models will change. In some cases, technology will make it change. Now, one of the key things is that 5G allows you to automate in a way which was really not possible before. Now, which would mean that many of our industries, not only in Bangladesh, but many other emerging countries, which are built on human interventions and skilled human interventions at a reasonable price or at a very good price, that entire thing might just go away, right? And I'm not talking of only a 3D printed jeans in New York, but I'm just saying that even automation in these factories would lead to a huge labor force being moved from one area to another. So what are these kind of social implications which you are thinking of?
Yeah, we think a lot about it. We actually work on it. Our company is currently engaged with a UN program globally called Generation Unlimited, which is about dealing with these issues. So we're part of the global executive committee for this that my boss is, and I'm on the global steering committee locally. I think it's important to understand that if you look at the jobs that are most likely to be disrupted by the fourth industrial revolution, there's a great study done by McKinsey that shows that jobs that are, not surprisingly, highly repetitive and that use a machine today are likely to be kind of disintermediated. The most likely job to be disintermediated is a sewing machine operator. That is the one. And the one least likely to be disintermediated is one we will all need, is a psychiatrist. But having said that, we need to be conscious of the fact that the technologies that just because we can do it, doesn't mean we have to do it. And then we have to find a reasonable approach to the social disruption that will happen. And we're not like Sweden, which is going to tax the use of robots in a Volvo plant or something in order to pay a minimum wage to all citizens of the country on the side. So we need to figure that out. So first of all, I think it's significant disruption. Our markets in Bangladesh and RMG are based on two things. One that's easily disruptible, the other one which is less easily disruptible. Our labor arbitrage advantage could disappear because of robotics and automation. However, what will not disappear is the infrastructure that has been created to handle RMG, the inputs, the logistics, the regulatory environment that's advantages. So there's other ways to try to mitigate that problem, and the government is keenly aware that this is a challenge. So we as leaders have to understand the impacts of the technologies that we are promulgating, and we spend some time on that for sure.
Thank you. Seema, what do you think of the regulatory landscape around 5G, and especially, in today's landscape of how the telecom operators are operating? Do you
I'm
really
the wrong
think,
person.
do you really think that we would see 5G in some time?
No. 5G, yes, it's imminent, right? 5G is imminent. They will. Come on. I don't think that's going to go away. But regulatory, I'm not the right person. But let me tell you, whatever it is, regulatory and what, I think there are huge benefits if it is done, as you rightly said, in the right spirit, in the way it should be deployed. See, there are two things that really matters. Country like India and the geography, we'll also have to see the traffic is, and the bandwidth is always sustainable and consistent. Because there are places where you have very, very good connectivity, and today also we suffer with poor connectivity. So I think that should go away with 5G. Now, given that, your reach to the last mile becomes a lot better. So why would regulatory, come in the way? Yes, regulatory will have a few things from the security standpoint, from monetization standpoint, from consumer standpoint. Of course, you should have it. So I'm not the right person to comment on it, but you should have it three aspects, right? Security, monetization, and consumer right should be protected. So that, I think, they'll play a vital part. Now, I'll tell you, they should, because with 5G, if you are now not going to deal only with mobile data and voice, and you're actually going to deal with sensitive data more than that, there should be some regulatory which ensures that it is well protected. So regulatory will come into big time into picture. The other is tariff control. I am just hoping that there'll be something, some way of defining that, right? We also have to see how this works when people have 5G and they go across, to the other countries. Because today with 4G, I think we face a lot of issues. It's not simple. People said it's seamless. It's not so seamless in some places. But that could be another thing. Will it mean that you have to coexist with the other one, or we can do away with it? So there is global repercussion, there will be local, there will be regulatory, there'll be small challenges with all the operators and service providers at loggerheads. I think it's going to be there, but overall, I'm kind of being wary of what I have seen in the previous one, 4G, where we had quite a bit of challenges. We actually could not get our whole infrastructure up on time to serve certain markets or serve certain applications, and we had to kind of do away with it, right? So because the regulation came in between, and we had to have some licenses, which we did not have in place. And imagine to get those licenses. So what I mean is, a regulatory should well define what a 5G would mean as license or regulation for different businesses who are going to be participating in that ecosystem, right? I'm an ecosystem partner. I'm not a 5G service provider, but I have a whole lot of things which I have to govern.
Of course. So, Michael, you obviously, you would be a service provider. So, what are your thoughts around some of the points which Seema raised around, tariff control and security? Let me just push you on these two.
Good Lord, we don't want the state involved in regular retail pricing, please. But having said that, I think you brought up some very good points about the regulatory challenge. And unsurprisingly, as technology evolves so quickly right now, it surpasses the ability for the regulator to be prescient and be prepared for it. So it arrives and the regulator goes, and what do we do next? And there are some real issues here in 5G that are problematic. The bandwidth is so abundant in 5G that we will slice up the network in different parts. And different customers will get different kinds of services that they want over the 5G network. How do you regulate that? What has happened with roaming in that area? There's just a bunch of issues about service levels, quality levels. How do you not become a monopoly? For example, it's quite likely in any country in the world under 5G that the military will want a private network over the 5G. And they'll go over our network in Bangladesh because we're the broadest network. How do you manage that? What goes there? There's also a lot of issues around the level of information that we receive because this is becoming huge. We're talking about exabytes of data per month right now, which flow through our system. The fundamental issue that the regulators are going to have to figure out is spectrum and business models. Spectrum in Bangladesh costs about $30 million per megahertz, which is why we don't buy too much spectrum, by the way. But having said that, in 5G, I need to buy 80 to 100 megahertz of spectrum in order to offer 5G. And I'm pretty sure if I go to Oslo and I ask my boards for $3 billion, 3 billion euros, in fact, worth of investment when we've spent over the last 20 years about 4 for 5G, I probably will be turned down. So we need to find different business models for that. And that's going to be the first step for sure.
Thank you. Very interesting. Any thoughts, Michael, from your side around, how you see the, you've worked in Africa, you've worked in, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh now, and of course you've worked in Bulgaria and, some other parts of Europe. When you look at these kind of new technologies coming in and, how do you see emerging markets react to it versus matured markets?
It's fun to hear because in some places, and I would say the subcontinent being one, the broad subcontinent, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, and I'll include Myanmar in there because they're not part of the subcontinent. They don't want to be, but Myanmar as well. I would say that they react faster and more aggressively because they see it as a potential source of leveling and competitive advantage in the increasingly digitized global economy. So I think they move faster. But let me just, a short story. About 10 years ago, I was in a village called Dirtu, 100 kilometers from the Somali border in Kenya, launching a Millennium Village with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who was the author of the Millennium Goals. No service there ever. Mast is up, microwave link, and a small school. This is like, you have to go there by helicopter. The only building that is solid in the village is the masjid. That's it. The rest is all tents. We turn on the system, I sit down, and we have Wi-Fi in the school, so I'm sitting in the schoolyard, and I sit down with my brand new, spanking new MacBook, whatever I had then. Sitting on the ground, I raise my head, there's a bunch of kids around me. And I had my phone and my laptop, and they said, sir, can I send an email to my friend in New York? Sir, could I use your phone to call my family in Nairobi? These kids had never had telecommunications before, but they wanted the same thing as any other child wanted. They wanted to be connected, they wanted to learn. So my view on this is that markets where there is, the demand is there. The demand is pent up, and when we launched 4G in Bangladesh, every time we launched a tower, it just sucked up revenue immediately. I mean, traffic, both. So that's really good. So I think we should just continue to plow ahead and make our economies as competitive as possible. This is the road, this is the port, this is the airport. This is what we need. We need these networks in order to be competitive.
Seema, when you think of 5G and the kind of applications that we think would come in with them, purely from your organization's perspective, how are you preparing for that?
So it's not going to change largely. The data center and design basics of data center, our managed services, our networks. See, we don't offer unprotected network at all. We offer only protected network. So given that, our network and our security infrastructures, our SOC, our fiber capacities, our entire switching equipments, I don't think that's going to change. My challenge still remains. I want to ask, maybe he'll be able to answer better. See, when the traffic comes from Wi-Fi or broadband, and then when it has to be responded through, if it is again through a Wi-Fi, I can understand, but through another kind of a protocol, we just have to see how this whole thing is going to work. How does it going to convert response, right? So we're preparing for that. We're actually doing a lot of prototype and work now, trying to see how we can cater to 5G applications, which are going to be very different from that of what the normal wired and Wi-Fi communication data flows that we had. So we are actually doing a lot of prototype. Entity itself is doing a lot of prototype. The other thing also is to see whether our global IP networks, which we own across the Pacific, require some integration and upgrade to be able to cater to 5G traffic, which we still don't know. Because a lot of customers or a lot of clients, we do offer that route to the end. So how will these two pan? What kind of handshake? What kind of changes? We are still grappling a little bit on that. We're just getting to know the technology better and equipment. We're working with several OEMs and like Ericsson, Cisco's, and trying to figure out what best. And I'm sure this is going to be baby step. It won't be overnight, but it's going to have some impact.
Very interesting. So I think in the interest of time, and I do want to leave some time for questions from the audience, we really heard two different perspectives. Of course, the worry around convergence, around integration, which Seema was talking about, how the integration would be from traffic coming from Wi-Fi, and how do we react to that, the entire incoming versus outgoing thing. And then, of course, the questions around, the tariff controls, the regulatory pieces. And then from Michael, we heard about, the different use cases, how some of the things which would use really low bandwidth, like, meter reading and, to the advanced robotics, and how those kind of things would have to coexist. Challenges around, how do you network slice? What happens when you network slice? How do you look at roaming? How do you look at, connectivity? The entire thing around, the impact of industrial automation and what 5G might drive on that on the society. We keep hearing about what it does to the, overall sustainability of, several ecosystems. And of course, there is a pent-up demand. It's needless to say that all of us in the room would do, would be far happier if we, suddenly get that, this reliability and the speed that we are aspiring for. So, two very distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, let me open it up for your questions. Can we have some questions for the panel?
What are the risk factors in terms of cybersecurity? Should we introduce or get used to 5G?
Well, I think they just multiply. I mean, we've now in a business now where every smartphone is a potential vector for threat, and our networks become strategically important, and our data centers become strategically important for the economic and national security of the states that we serve. So as CEOs of mobile operators, we now become the critical infrastructure through which anything can be played with. So we spend a lot of time. There is a lot of work done on assessing how do we manage to create defensible architectures in our IT infrastructures. It's all IT infrastructure now. And how do we manage to make sure that we can control? We literally, and it's not a surprise to anybody in the room, there will be thousands of attempts every day to penetrate our networks by a kid in a garage in Chattogram. That's okay, we can manage that. But when they're nation states, it's a different kind of game that we have to be careful about, and that's at the level that we play.
If I may just add one thing. I think you had a very pertinent question, right? So now the level that you define for DDoS and malicious attacks would be very different. DDoS is going to be, we have a protection at the perimeter level, we have equipment which is protecting at your individual level, but I think we have to define one more at the outer network level. Otherwise, we will not know what is trusted and what is not, and we may just, because the volume is anyway big, you can't go by volume.
Absolutely. I work for a bank, and we provide mobile solutions to customers, mobile-based solutions. So one of the worry we have is if the source is contaminated, that's going to make the application pretty nasty.
Thank you. In the interest of time, can we have the last question? Yes, sir.
Thank you for your views. Michael said something about just because we can do it doesn't mean we have to do it. Now, that being the case, I'll just give an example that Adidas has shut down 2 of its robotics factories in Europe. That was the social aspect of it, keeping that in mind. Now, whether when you say just because we have it, can we do it or we shouldn't do it, is this a policy decision by the states, or is it a policy business decision by the operators? Or whatever?
Yeah, this is a really fundamental business ethics discussion. If you thought that the mechanical loom, when it was invented at the beginning of the first industrial revolution, caused massive disruption in society, urbanization, and people throwing their shoes in the devices, also known the sabot, which is a shoes sabotage. So we do have this major issue that we have to deal with. It is government, it's industry, it's society that's going to have to make choices here. And if we are going to make the choice to automate and displace people, we better have an answer, because people who are displaced are not going to be very happy, and it'll become disruptive all over again. So, thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we bring this session to a close. Can we have a round of applause for the speakers, please? Thank you.